Are we good to open it to public comment?
I think staff would like to just conclude this with a brief staff report that just kind of pulls this together, and then we can move into public comment. I will also note too, the applicant and I think additional representatives from the applicant are present. So typically when we do this, staff would give a report, then give a chance to the applicant to speak, then take public comment, then go into discussion or any additional information or questions.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make sure with Salina Media Connection we are up and running. Are we good? Okay, wonderful. So, Mr. Chair, we are reconvening the meeting.
Yes, we are.
Okay. With that, having just watched the video and I think addressing how we plan on proceeding from here, I just wanted to, I feel like I'm repeating myself, but just identify that the applicant is here to speak. So if commissioners have questions, they are available. We also have additional city staff here, including city's legal counsel and the city engineer. I believe the applicant has also brought engineering representation. I think that was indicated by one of the planning commissioners as something they would hope to have available at this meeting. Since we just spent a fair amount of time going through the video and I gave a staff report at that time, I'm hoping the planning commission won't mind, or those in attendance, that I don't go through that whole staff report again. I think it's pretty fresh for us all. What I would probably add to this conversation is just kind of reemphasize a couple things and add additional clarification that, platting, and particularly replatting, is kind of an interesting item. It's not quasi-judicial, it's not ministerial, it's administrative. So it falls into that category where there's a set criteria, rules, and regulations in which we look at based on the application, and the answer of yes or no is, does it comply with those things that it needs to comply with? And that's how this has been applied. If you look at the rules and regulations, whether it's in the subdivision code, zoning code, or other applicable municipal code, the plat meets those. And my response to that is not to take away from the community or the neighborhood some of their feelings about how this would affect them, but from a decision, how a decision is made in this type of case, that decision is related to, does this design comply or not? And there's nothing in code that says if it's a replat, it has a higher level of expectation as to how it's justifying it or how it's designed or shouldn't it happen just because a plat has already been approved. I think the other thing to reemphasize is that the Planning Commission, because this is administerial, you are the final decision makers regarding the plat itself. The City Commission piece in this whole process and how this plat moves on, what's moving on is the acceptance of any easements that are a part of the plat. But the plat itself and how it's designed, that decision is made by this body. The things that have been identified in some of those conditions related to the emergency access road and related to the Mariposa agreement for the pond, those things have been identified and specifically added to the City Commission because they have the power to influence those decisions. And the roles and responsibilities, those are their responsibilities, which you've identified them to address. But the decision about the plat comes down to this body. With that, staff stands ready to answer any additional questions you have. I know the two comments that were sent in later yesterday addressed special assessments and some concerns and questions you may have related to that, and I believe staff is prepared to speak to that. and also some additional questions related to drainage. And as I mentioned, we have engineering staff here, and I believe the applicant has their engineering staff here.
Okay, thank you. Any additional questions for staff? I think we're ready to hear from the applicant.
William Shepard, 430 Greystone Drive. I'm the developer and applicant, and I can answer any questions you have.
Do you have any questions for Mr. Shepard? It's like no questions. Anything you'd like to add or any comment about the situation or?
I don't know. I can reiterate the point that I've done everything the city has asked me to do. And I'm not sure what else I need to do, but I've done everything that was required, followed every step, done everything that I possibly think of. So,
I understand. Thank you very much.
thank you. Yep.
So there was somebody that voiced they wanted to hear from the engineer or the representative from Mr. Shepard.
Commissioner Bernhardt, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I believe in your comment that you sent in that you were hoping to have an opportunity to speak to engineering staff from the applicant. Is that correct?
It was. I was hoping to ask him directly. Dan Stack answered most of those questions. I do just have one question for him, though, just in regards to see if he could clarify how one study had the 0.53 coefficient, and 10 days later it was changed to 0.52.
So what happened on that deal? City asked me to look into the coefficient, so I did. I submitted that original to them. They compared. They'd already done their own numbers. They compared it to mine, and they were lower than mine. I was a little higher. So we got together, had a phone conversation. We discussed some of the items where we were different, and we went back and looked at our numbers, and we adjusted. You know, we were kind of conservative on how wide our driveways were, sidewalks, that kind of stuff. So we kind of met in the middle, and that's how we wound up with the number we were. It was just discussion, normal back and forth between engineers, and a little bit of disagreement, and we came to an agreement on what we thought was appropriate.
Okay. And I'll also ask you the same question I asked Dan on the addition of the pools, et cetera, and all the additions and stuff, sheds, roofs, the extra runoff and stuff. How are you for sure that's being captured and it won't result in more runoff than what's projected?
I feel like, I mean, this is not an exact science. We're looking into these numbers really hard. And I mean, there's so many variables. We apply a 0.2 to lawn. I mean, what's to say it's not a 0.15? You got to make some judgment. I feel like this is normal engineering practices. There's probably going to be some that are less. There's going to be some that are a little higher. I don't think it's a significant amount that it's going to bring on harm to property or public health. I don't think it's a significant change. You can question people's methodologies all you want. You know, one engineer to another may be more conservative than the other, but I don't feel like the original study was, you could argue, yeah, maybe they should have used a higher C value, but
Okay.
they aren't out of line with what standard engineering practices are. I don't feel that it warrants, you know.
Okay. The only reason I ask is we're just so close to that capacity level that tiny fractions right now could drastically change that pond.
You're looking at approximations, you're comparing approximations.
Correct, and that's what-
So I just don't think the numbers are not finite enough to be able to say, oh, well, you're one or cubic yard over, so the dam's gonna fail or the pond's gonna fail. That's not the case. I mean, we're giving our best, we're trying to guess the best we can, and we're trying to just provide a level of service and safety that is standard and that society can afford. We can't go out and build massive dams that are gonna control a 500-year storm is just, you can't afford to do that, so. I think, yeah, we're just digging in a little harder than we probably ought to on the numbers. They're just not that finite.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Before you go, can I just get your name and the company you represent?
I'm Justin Owens. I'm with Call Valley Engineering.
Thank you very much.
Justin, I have a question as well.
Yeah.
As far as the traffic counts go, have there been any engineering studies regarding traffic counts on cul-de-sacs as they would compare to a normal city block?
I mean, on a cul-de-sac, you basically are going to look at your trip generation is going to be based on how many houses you have. And you got a 2-lane road, whether it's on a cul-de-sac or it's on a arterial through road. A 2-lane road can function. I mean, you're going to have a lot of traffic coming off of that for it to surpass the capacity of a 2-lane road. And one of the things I did in that study, you say, we can't guarantee it's 55 and over, but those numbers just kind of give an idea of if you did have 55 and over, it would be decreased. But I did also take a look at the intersection with Cedar Ridge and Bentgrass Drive, and that's where you're going to see your biggest concentration. If we're really increasing traffic because of the additional houses, you're going to see it at that intersection. So I just did a quick look at it to see, would that intersection become overwhelmed? What would it take? And it took having to double the amount of traffic coming out of Grand Prairie in order to even cause it to bump up to a lower level of service. So we look at a level of service as A through F, A being best, F being worst case, you need to do something about it. I mean, to drop to a level of service B, you'd have to more than double the traffic coming out of this development, and you're not going to do that by adding, 11 houses. It's just not going to happen. So I just don't feel that it's a concern that the traffic's going to overwhelm the system.
I just wasn't sure how cul-de-sacs measured up against city blocks. Being city blocks, you had 2 ways in and 2 ways out, and the cul-de-sac would be 1 and 1. So
Yeah, I just look at it from a capacity standpoint, and 2-lane road is a 2-lane road, and this is how much traffic can be handled at an appropriate level of service.
This is Commissioner Baffa. I think things might change in the future, but right now I'm getting 2 weeks to the gallon of gas. I'm not really concerned about congestion.
Any more questions? Thank you very much. So are we ready for public comment? All right, let's open it up.
Thank you, John Blanchard. Whoa. Can you hear me now, can't you? Okay. I just want to follow up. You asked a question about traffic, and he answered it with the ability to handle capacity. Well, when you had your variation on the cul-de-sac length, it wasn't a question of whether or not the road would be wide enough. It was whether or not your cul-de-sac length was a determining factor on the subdivisions and the residents. Ms. Good, you stated in the last meeting you're a professional engineer. Are you a civil engineer?
That's what I took my test in,
Okay.
because I didn't have environmental engineer at the time.
Now, I emailed you, so this is not a trick question. You said that you tried to look up why cul-de-sac lengths were limited to 600 feet.
I did.
Is traffic counts one of the reasons why?
You pointed that out to me. Yes.
Okay.
I missed that. I noticed the part about the blocks, city blocks as being a reason, and whatever else I said on that video. So.
Right. And in the meeting, I believe it might have been in March when the question was asked originally of staff, I got up as a landscape architect and planner, and mentioned that one of the biggest reasons is traffic counts. Generally, you have a 600-foot cul-de-sac length maximum because you'll get 10 houses on each side at 60-foot parcel widths. And that's 200 daily trips. That's generally because they're saying 10 trips a day, okay? When you get much higher than that, 2,800 feet, 5-6 times that length, that's a lot more traffic. And that's why generally you don't get into fire emergency access roads, because nobody designs cul-de-sacs that long unless there's only one reason to. And that's pretty much what happened here. It was plotted for 19 lots, and it should have stayed at 19 lots, because the more cars you put on there, the more traffic you have on there, and the more impact it has. And it's not just a function of, is the road wide enough? So I thought that that was sort of a misleading answer. I think using over 55 housing is extremely, extremely wrong. It really doesn't address anything. There's no reason why they're going to keep it to that. And not only that, but a comment was made before about how the lots would be maintained because they were going to be villas. They're not going to be villas. There's no PDD. If they want to build the houses the same size and use up 30% of the lots and build right to the property lines or the setback lines, they can do it. There's nothing keeping them from doing that. What I would like to talk to you, and the main point about my interest in this, I didn't know anybody in the Grand Prairie subdivisions. I knew one person in the Grand Prairie subdivision. I knew Chuck Gary because he went to my church. But I didn't know he lived in Grand Prairie until this thing started. So I'm coming at this without I don't have a horse in this race or a dog in this fight or whatever the proper way to address that is these days. I just know that I appointed 2 of you, and I know that my feeling about planning commissions, the 2 biggest things are having an open mind and not having a conflict of interest. And I trust that all of you have open minds, and I trust that on this item everyone has free of conflicts of interest. I really called this item wrong when I called in the other day. I could have swore it was a 5-2 vote the other way. And that's the comments I want to make now. The instructions that you're given were to say, this is a slam dunk, there's nothing you can do, and the developer's done everything they've been asked to. Well, they've been asked to do traffic studies, and they give you a traffic study that's based on lower traffic counts to make it work. They're asked to do a drainage study, and they don't use existing drainage numbers on the houses that are there now. They use a 10-year-old study or a 12-year-old study to say, well, this is what the study was then. The houses there are bigger now than what they had thought they would be originally. So they had to make up that information to make the drainage study work. I don't know what they did between February 20th and February 28th to make those numbers work, but they had to massage those numbers to make them work. We heard on March 3rd, I believe it was the last time we met in person, we heard from the city attorney about a court case called Round Rock or something versus Olathe. My battery on my phone went dead back there during the video replay. And it talks about discretion. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the history of this and part of what that discretion did on that particular court case. It said that broad discretion to draw upon master plans and design guidelines that were in place. Now, I will tell you this, that master plan as a basis for saying all of this new development is consistent with the Mariposa master plan. Look, see, here's a Mariposa master plan. It's a sub-area plan. At least it's been used in that fashion. And so one of the problems that I have is the fact that while you guys were told by the city attorney and shown a court case that said you have discretion, they're sitting here giving you instructions before you vote that tell you you don't have discretion. And I find that to be sending mixed messages. And I will say in particular, and I hate the questions you ask and sort of your thoughtful consideration and deliberations. And I really thought there was a 5-2 vote on that thing. But I think you guys have a lot more, and I said this on March 3rd, you have a lot more discretion and you have a lot more authority and power than sometimes some people would want you to believe that you have. What I heard at the end of the last meeting, and I don't hold the city attorney against any of that. He wasn't even at that meeting. But thankful he's at this one. And so I just think that there needs to be some sort of consideration given to the fact that we have used the Mariposa Master Plan. We've used it on every single plat and action that has taken place that has any sort of connection to Marymount Road and Cedar Ridge Drive, including the one with Bob Hayworth that has come after this one. And so you have the discretion to say, we used it in the first phase of the original plat of Grand Prairie. If you go back and look at it, it's been in every planning packet. It's been addressed in every planning packet. It's been part of trotting that plan out when they want a favorable action consistent with that plan. And that's what my comments were over the phone was, it's not consistent with the Mariposa Master Plan. So I wish I had my phone. I don't, because I'm probably missing something. false. Staff should have caught you when you said that. You said that is false. You cannot go back and undo the variation that you gave them to have the plat done. They have a legal plat with legal variations. And so, yeah, your discretion goes out the window after you're not given enough information in the first hand to say, wait a second, I can't exercise discretion on a cul-de-sac length with faulty or misleading traffic numbers. It's a bad idea to have a cul-de-sac length that long, okay? If we could all go back in time, some of us might say, we should probably make sure that that cul-de-sac is much shorter and not do it all the way out there. But we can't go back and redo that. You can redo that now. But the direction you were given from staff is that, and from the deliberations of some commissioners that went unchecked, was that if you don't give the variation, then everybody has to have sprinklers on their house. Well, that's not true. That is flatly not true. You could have denied the variations, and the replat would have died because it doesn't meet the subdivision regulations, and Mr. Shepherd would still be left with his plat intact. You don't go back and roll back that plat, and there isn't any other variation as to whether or not you do it. It's just the gateway. And I don't know, is there something you'd like to add, Commissioner Olson? You seem to be
No,
muted.
just listening.
Okay.
You seem to be getting upset.
No, I'm not upset. I don't have a horse in this fight, but it's very telling
It is.
of you to point that out. Do your homework. Were you the one that said that everybody would have to get fire sprinklers? I knew it was either you or Commissioner Gilmore.
Well, shouldn't you be sure of who you're accusing?
Okay, then I'm going to assume it was you.
Yes, it was me.
Okay. My apologies to Commissioner Gilmore. The bottom line is this. You just voted on a reconsideration, and the first thing you were told is that you have no discretion. I bet you guys didn't know you took discretion out of your own hands. That's what's disturbing as someone who feels like ethics are important in the planning process. I don't think any of you up there have been unethical, and I don't think a whole lot of people are purposely trying to be unethical. But when you have people, residents, who take a lot of time to come out here and do it because you know what? They are genuinely concerned about their property values. And we are public servants. We owe them an open and fair process. I don't think they're getting it. And that's my point, and you can interrupt me if I'm wrong. Once you give them the variables or the variances or the variations or whatever we're calling them, then they can't do anything. And I'll just ask this question to the planning commissioners, and you can ask it of staff. What happens if you deny the variations? What happens? Thank you.
Thank you.
Don Went, 1401 Bentgrass Drive. Commissioners, I just wanted to ask a couple questions, and one is, we keep talking about these traffic counts and the water runoff, and if you look at the studies, again, they're the 55 and older, and it's been established that that's not enforceable. And I think Mr. Shepherd said that that's his target, but I think his past has demonstrated that he doesn't stick with what he initially tells people as far as our covenants. Our covenants state that you can't have a home without a basement, and he approved a home without a basement. So we feel that should be stricken from any consideration or any part of your minds, because we need to look at this of all possibilities. And so I think we need to relook at and do another traffic study because of that. But also, do you realize that there's only one entrance and one exit? So 100% of that traffic, 100% of that traffic will come down that street. Now, when you do traffic studies, does that take that into account? Because typically you have multiple exits. In other words, you have a group of homes that it's 10 per day or whatever or 10 trips per day. Does that take into account that all 10 of those have to go in one direction, both ways? And I don't know. I'm a lay person, so I don't know that. But also, the thing that I have a real concern with and trouble with is that we have a study of a water runoff, and a few days later, those numbers were changed. And what I heard tonight was we got together and we all kind of said, yeah, maybe this number looks better. That really concerns me, and that concerns me a lot. And we've said before, and we've shown you pictures, that when we get a rain, those ponds fill up. And you have seen pictures where those ponds are full, and this isn't a 10-year rain, or it isn't a 20-year rain, whatever the studies are based on. This is just a rainfall that happens that's not a flood. No other part of Salina flooded, but those ponds, those retention ponds, were clear to the top. So if we're adjusting numbers so it fits within that range, and it's right at the very edge, if what I'm hearing as at the maximum level, we have visual evidence that these numbers shouldn't have been changed so it fits within that parameters. And, you know, we haven't dwelled on the property values. That's a concern, yes, but I don't think that from the citizens you've heard very often we've talked about property values. But Mr. Linkowitz, you had made a comment on the video that we've seen that you live next door to a house that's half the value, and you're okay with that. But does that mean that everybody else has to be? Because you're okay with that, then everybody else should be okay with that? And placing this type of housing at the very end of this development, when all that traffic will be coming again through the one road in and out, and it does not fit. And I really have another concern that, as Ms. Driscoll said, that this is totally an administrative process. Then why are we even here? Why does it come before the Planning Commission if it's totally just administrative, where as long as it fits the square, that it's R1, that you have no discretion to vote this down? Why are we here? Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
I think most of my stuff has already been answered. Chris Carlson, 1217 Bentgrass. One was, why are we here? And I think you guys kind of touched bases on that. If it wasn't meant to be a public forum, and my understanding is you guys are supposed to be kind of for the citizens, you're supposed to be this in-between when you have a city completely telling you what to do and how to do it, and obviously on a developer side. The second thing I will reiterate, I am completely blown away that from the very beginning, this was a 55-plus plan. And as we're looking through the packets, Caw Valley, the different traffic counts, the water, so it states in there, it was on 55. We all know that's out the door. So we go back to the lots and the lot size, how houses are. Is there yards for kids? Will kids be running around? Now we have the big safety of you have these tiny lots. We don't know what the square footage is going to be. That's been wiped out. Nobody pays attention to that. But I do know, and I don't remember her name, the little realtor gal, that was a concern she brought up. Well, now that the 55 is out the door, that is a big concern. So I have my grandkids come, and I have a decent-sized yard. I can't imagine some of these small ones of places that I have been where they shove these little houses. You have these tiny yards, and not to expect that to happen is, I don't know, lawsuit waiting to happen. But I don't know. tired of coming. I can't believe we're to this point after 8 months. Personally, I kind of feel like some people have made some pre-decisions without really looking at everything. Being new in town, there's a lot on social media right now with not just this, the protests and everything. There's a lot of hate in our town. A lot of people are very upset with the city. And you kind of look at that and you go, things are blown out of proportion. My experience these last 8 months, I'm kind of starting to see, I kind of understand some of the comments. So I really hope you guys have opened your ears, you've opened your mind, and you're looking at the big picture and not just this one little box that they keep saying that's all you need to look at. Because if that were true, we wouldn't have this forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Afternoon, Justin Hankey, 1322 Bentgrass Drive. Separately, I really appreciate what she said. I think Commissioner Good, you were there yesterday, and everybody talking at the beginning of the City Commission meeting. There is a lot of distrust, and this has been a long process, and things haven't always been as transparent as I think would be desired by any of us. So I really appreciate her comment. I have the two submissions that you were given. I don't know if you guys were able to read over them. So I just wanted to touch base on them. If you were, great, I really appreciate it. If not, I'm just going to touch on the topics real quick. In regards to the special assessments, in 2010, the bond was issued, and it contained a significant number of common charges that was distributed with Phase 1 and Phase 2. There was no, Phase 2 was just to include all the lots that were left. I can't say exactly what the number is because in regards to the street distribution, we weren't provided that, but you're probably looking at anywhere from $400,000 to $600,000 of special assessments as a common charge amongst the Phase 1 and Phase 2 distribution, and that was split 70 ways. Mr. Shepard has commented multiple times that this was always my intention to split these lots. This was from the beginning. Well, those special assessments should have been noted that from the beginning because it caused the residents to pick up 1/70th of the cost as opposed to 1/81st, or as we started in the beginning, it was for 36 lots, so 1/86th. It's a significant amount of money over the term of the bond. It's over $100,000. Okay, that's a big deal. Splitting now, when you said this was the intention in the beginning, is literally the definition of fraud. You're taking money from people and then changing at the end once the bulk of the special assessments have been paid. This sets the precedent for all developers to do this. Let's take 30 acres and make 4 lots, and then once 2 schmoes pick up the 2 lots, we'll just split it up, and then it's a little easier to sell, and that we don't have to pay for it. Okay? And yes, he did have to pick up a lot of those costs of the special assessments once the bond was issued, but as those lots got purchased, those were the special assessments of the residents, and we paid on those. And the bond goes till 2024. So you're just going to take the money to pay for a phase that we object to. It's not an honest process, in our opinion. And as I said, he stated this multiple times, and so here's this from the January 6th Planning Commission meeting.
Hours here of debate. What would you propose to do?
Well, my proposal is to move forward with what I've proposed. I mean, this all started with a replat and a rezone, and it changed to a replat on something that was originally intended when we started this 12 years ago.
And he said that at other city commission and planning commission meetings that this was always the intention. That's a big deal not to do at the beginning when you're talking about special assessments. The other issue I spoke on in the other packet were the drainage issues. So the current application does not meet the city's stormwater management regulations, which require subdivision developers to design a stormwater drainage system to detain additional runoff caused by the development site, Grand Prairie. The difference between the existing and developed conditions. Last meeting, it was acknowledged that there was a significantly higher percentage of impermeable area being used on each lot that was calculated in 2008. There are 2 components to the drainage studies. It's detention pond capacity, which you guys spoke on, and we spoke on about the coefficient of the 2 different studies that were provided by Mr. Owens. And then there's peak flow runoff. So the runoff that occurs that doesn't go through a detention area. So it's not a controlled rate across the golf course. The engineers have not addressed the amount of peak flow runoff with current conditions of Grand Prairie and what is being dumped onto the golf course and going over to the Mariposa Pond. This is a separate comment. You can say it's hearsay. I called Campbell and Johnson and I said, this was a study you did back then. They remembered the study. And I asked them, should new studies be based on current conditions? And he said, absolutely, if they want the numbers to be accurate. I then said, would you provide that in email? He said, absolutely not. Okay, now that's coming from me. You can consider it hearsay, that's fine. Only 35% of the Grand Prairie site goes through the detention ponds, so a controlled rate of discharge on the golf course. The other 65% of the Grand Prairie site just gets dumped on the golf course at an uncontrolled rate. So that doesn't meet the city's stormwater requirements. And that's why Grand Prairie, when it dumps 65% of the stormwater runoff onto the golf course, holes 13, 14, 15, and 16 are always flooded with a significant rain, especially hole 13. And that's where that previous site of a detention retention pond was supposed to be, that was later changed because of golfers' pattern of landing off the tee. It only matches the existing difference from pre and post-development conditions for Mariposa Pond, not the golf course. The golf course doesn't meet this requirement, and that's 25 acres of land that's just getting water dumped on it. And it makes a difference on the golf course. There is flooding constantly on the golf course. Dean Andrew had reported to Commissioner Baffa back in September that detention facilities for Phase 3 were already installed on hole 12. There are no detention facilities for Phase 3 on hole 12. There are no easements granted by the city for this purpose, and there is nothing budgeted for detention facilities in the special assessments.
We had one of our aerial photos that had the utilities on it. There is a retention pond, but it seems to be further away than I would imagine. I just don't think it should be dumped on the golf course, is what I'm saying. There are detention ponds farther down, but the area here will drain here and will discharge onto the golf course, and there are detention areas that were created on the golf course eventually. The original plan was to turn this into a water feature or pond between, but as they studied the landing patterns of people driving off the tees, they decided that that would be a very unpopular water hazard, and they said, we're not going to have a pond here, but there are detention areas here, and then this water migrates across the golf course and gets over into the Mariposa Pond. But everything was sized for this to drain down to here and then come across the golf course where it ends up in the Mariposa Pond. But all the detention facilities and everything are already in place.
So he said they'll eventually be there, and then they are there. He's pointing, when he says here, there's a shot on the video, he's pointing to the bunker on hole 12. There's nothing installed there. There's nothing on hole 12 that has the detention capabilities for the runoff from the north end of Phase 2 and Phase 3. It would require probably 80% the size of an Olympic swimming pool to detain that for a 25-year flood, and there's nothing there. And that's another comment, whether it was intentional or unintentional, don't need to get into it, but it's just not accurate, okay? So we're having money taken from us, and then we're dumping all this on the golf course. And I've spoken to Mr. Coble, who's the Mariposa HOA. He's out of town on work right now. He's still following along and concerned about the peak flow runoff, okay? And he knows it hasn't been addressed with current conditions. All right, that's all I have to say. I appreciate you guys' time.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Sorry, I got sidetracked. The other thing I wanted to comment on was with Mr. Owen speaking. A lot of us, you guys are engineers, I'm a physician, it's science, it's math. Everything seemed to be a fact until it wasn't a helpful fact. And then it became subjective, oh, this isn't an accurate process, we're just doing the best we can. There has to be a line in the sand somewhere. We can't just continually, because then it becomes completely subjective and everything can be approved on just the opinion of how you feel. And that's not what should be done when we're talking about engineering and drainage studies. There's got to be a point where this is what we should do and this is what we shouldn't. And just like Mr. Went had said, you're literally having pictures of the repercussions of what we're doing. It's not fitting. And like, yes, if there's just a picture, we just got to say, well, it's just a picture. But when the studies are not helping out with what your decision, I just don't see how you move forward and say that's acceptable from a scientific and mathematical standpoint. It just doesn't make sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg Bengtson, legal counsel for the city. When the matter of the special assessments was raised and we had the benefit of the analysis and the materials that were presented, we did feel compelled to inquire of bond counsel, the city's bond counsel. As you might imagine, that process and everything about that is a function of the fact that the special assessment funding is ultimately financed through the issuance of the city's general obligation bonds. So bond counsel being the one that has to sign an opinion that those are generally, usually tax exempt, and that the process has been completed, it's important that we look to them as far as anything that happens there. Gina Rekoff in the Kansas City office of the law firm of Gilmore and Bell who currently assists the city as bond counsel. She confirmed this morning for us that when benefit districts are created, there is a statutorily required process for notices and public hearings before assessments are levied against property in the district. Notice is also filed in the real estate records so that any future property owner is put on notice about the existence of the benefit district and amount of assessment. After this statutory process is complete, there is a 30-day period during which assessments may be challenged. After this 30-day period, there's a statute of limitations that prohibits any future challenges to the assessments. Absent omissions, errors, or mistakes in the assessment relating to the total cost of the improvement, there is no statute or case law in Kansas that requires the city to later reallocate special assessments within a benefit district after the assessment ordinance is finalized. In looking to your deliberations today, again, hearkening back to the subdivision regulations, as you may be aware, they do require that, or the question is whether adequate public infrastructure exists or can be reasonably be constructed to serve the subdivision with streets, city water service, city sanitary sewer service, and emergency warning sirens. Looking at it here locally again in relation to the subdivision regulations, it does not speak to how those improvements either have been or might be financed. So certainly understand the point as to the math and that aspect of it from the standpoint of the current owners relative to the proposal, but again, hearkening back to the subdivision regulations, it does not appear to be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you. Could you please go up to the mic, please? Thank you very much.
Chris Carlson, Betgrass. If this plat is changed, does that open that up then for, because obviously the assessments would be different because you're doubling the lots?
It is my understanding, and we did also confirm that with Ms. Rekoff, she anticipated that there is a sum associated with the current assessments relative to the lots affected by the replat. And she anticipated that if the replat were to occur and it came time to send out the notices for those assessments, that the question would most likely be directed to her as to how that should be done. And generally speaking, it would be that sum with the change in the divisor as to the new number of lots. So I think you're generally correct. It would be the same amount that would have otherwise been assessed to those lots, reallocated on the basis of the number, on the new number of lots.
Thank you.
I just want to make a separate comment from what he's saying, just because we've been discussing with our legal counsel as well. Given that it was stated at the beginning that this was the intention, that changes the intent of what was going on. It's ethically, literally fraud. That was your plan. You stated it. That was your plan at the time. And then now we're later changing it after the distribution of, 12 years or 10 years into the special assessment bond. That's what changes the factor that it was stated that this was always the intention. After speaking with counsel, if it wasn't that, yes, it is hard to redistribute the special assessment finances, but just the intent to do that at the beginning not being addressed and assessed in the lots, that's a huge change in the factor of what you need to ethically consider. Does it seem right to you guys to do that? Is that the standard we're going to set in Salina for developers from here on out?
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, Mr. Scragg pointed out to me one point of clarification that I should make is that that reallocation would be as to the phase 3 lots only. I don't know if that was confusing or not. The reallocation, there's a certain amount allocated to those lots currently in phase 3. And it would just be the phase 3, I've forgotten the number of lots, but whatever the current number of lots would normally be the divisor on that obligation associated with those lots. It would be that sum, and the new divisor would be the new number of lots under the replat. I'm sorry? Well, as I say, I understand the math, and not to make too big a point of it, obviously my comments and our consultation with bond counsel were related to the role of the city in the matter. Nothing to do with the role of the developer in the matter. But we felt like in that the issue was raised, that it required consulting with bond counsel on what the obligations are and what the likely ramifications would be.
Thank you. I didn't hear the comments at the table, and I understand it's inconvenient, but it is a formality. Yeah, just for public record, we have to hear what you said because there was a response to it.
Thank you. Don Wendt, 1401 Bentgrass. I think that's muddying the water. You know, what we're saying is that the original intent, according to Mr. Shepard, was always to replat this. And being that original intent was there, then the funds were misappropriated or not, or assessed. And we're saying, yes, we understand, Mr. Bingston, that the divisor will be now in phase 3. But what about us? You know, why aren't those funds then redistributed back to us? Which gives you another clear reason to just leave it alone. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more public comment?
May I just?
Well, he said, thank you.
Bill Shepard, 430 Greystone Drive. I just want to make it a point that, you know, when we initially platted this, there was lots of ideas in phase 3. And if you guys think that I had some inkling 12 years ago that I was only going to do 19 instead of 30 lots to save a few $1,000, you're crazy. But that's, I mean, 12 years ago, we had no idea what we were going to do. Knew we'd do something, but we had to replat. We had to plat the whole thing for our water lines and everything that had to go across the golf course. And that was something we worked out with the city. So, you know, thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Blanchard?
I was just curious if, because I'd like to say something about a motion to reconsider, will you have a citizens forum after this? Because I really do think it's important that, whenever someone comes up here and the city manager or city staff disagrees with somebody, they're quick to come up and correct them and everything. But in this case where I'm asking for them to come up and give you additional information, they sit back on their hands and act like, well, only if someone asks us to. And it really shows you how there's a clause in the ethics policy of the city of Salina that says that you will not withhold information to achieve a desired outcome. The public is asking that you be given information and other people be given information, and we sit back on it because we may not want to let you know that you can make a motion to reconsider, go back, and change your vote on the variances. Because you're acting now as if this thing meets all the subdivision standards. It doesn't meet all the subdivision standards. It just simply doesn't. And I wish that staff would speak up and tell you that it doesn't meet all the subdivision standards if you don't pass the variances. So thanks. Are you going to have a citizens forum after this?
It's on the agenda.
If you were to look at the agenda, the public forum is on the agenda.
I'm sorry, could you rephrase that?
If you look on the agenda, it is noted public forum, number 5,
Okay, so
on the published agenda,
the answer is yes, there will be.
because it's on the published agenda.
Okay, so the answer is yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could pose a question to Mr. Blanchard. Were you referring to me? Were you thinking I was unresponsive? I just wanted to be sure.
I think part of that might be my fault because just the nature of this meeting is a little unorthodox and it hasn't followed a set protocol. And I think there was a little bit of communication error on my part. So I do take some accountability there. If there was an appearance of a lack of cooperation or willingness to get up, I'll take that as
Well,
my
I don't
responsibility.
think, I just wanted to make sure Mr. Blanchard or anybody in the room needs to know. On your initial question, I was trying to defer to the chair as to whether it was time to come up or not, and I think hopefully we handled that okay. If there are questions having to do with the variations, I hope for the planning commissioner's standpoint that you all have, well, from a standpoint of the city and staff's concerns, my concerns as to process, the ultimate objective is to make sure that all of your questions are answered as completely and thoroughly as possible. And I didn't particularly think, or I didn't think I was necessarily the best person to be responding to the variations issue. And if there are questions relative to the variations, I think we just need to make sure we get those explored to whatever extent you all find helpful.
Thank you.
Hey, Mr. Bankston, could I ask you a question as well? In the recording from the last meeting, I had made a statement that regardless of whether or not this is replatted, we would need to approve the variations. Was that a misspoke on my part?
The variations associated with the current plat are in place, and Mr. Shepard has a legal plat currently that included the approval of variations at that time. The variations are back before you because we're looking at a replat scenario. So I'll know that you were incorrect, but if the variations are not approved, if the replat is not approved, what is in place remains in place,
Okay.
including those original variations.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
Given a couple comments that have been a little chippy between a couple parties, I want to clarify, there's no intent to accuse Mr. Shepherd of intent to deceive to get the money. The intent was that we were going to replat, and that affected the outcome of how the distribution is. There's no pointing fingers in terms of intentionally trying to deceive for financial gain, but that occurs, and that's what it's not. And I thought Mr. Driscoll was extremely rude to Mr. Blanchard with his question. We just need to try and be civil in this scenario. It's a tough scenario for everybody, including you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure it's clear that staff is here to answer any questions. We have consistently provided information in your packet, and we're here to be a resource. One of the reasons, even I have posed that question of, would you like to speak to Mr. Bankston right now, is during public comment, people are waiting to be heard. It's typical that we take all public comment, and then staff can follow up based on the questions of the commission. But as typical, if a commissioner feels that that needs to be addressed at that point, staff is available to address it at that point. There is no denying information or not making people available. So, and throughout this process, if there's been a subject matter expert that you needed here, for example, tonight, verifying and notifying the applicant that it had been requested by a planning commissioner that their engineering staff be here to be able to answer questions, we've tried to provide that. And then part of that process is clearly making available information in advance and through those published records, including the agenda for this evening, to make sure that that process is available and the public has an opportunity to speak. So if there's concerns with that, we are happy to address that. I mean, that's part of even this meeting tonight.
Thank you. I personally don't have those concerns, but if anybody here on the commission has that concern, please verbalize it.
No, I do have a question, though, that's been raised through the public comment, and like to have it addressed by either Mr. Stack or the gentleman, sorry, I forgot, from Call Valley on the drainage situation. I believe it was Dr. Hankey raised the question on the drainage study, that it was done originally in, 2008, and that the numbers that we're using, we're still going back and using those numbers. So if somebody could address that of whether you re-looked at everything, or we're just using old numbers, or actually we went back out and whatever that process is.
Okay, Dan Stack, city engineer, thank you. I did bring, I thought it'd probably come up, so I thought we'd just go through it, I guess. There's a lot to go through with drainage and a lot of good questions, and can't dispute some of the questions and the reasons that you have those questions. So I thought Dustin, could you pull up some of the exhibits that I brought over? We can just try to go through a few things. Dustin's going to pull up some just documents that kind of, I hope, help. We'll see if they help. Let's start with the first one here. This is the Mariposa Pond. So it's a large pond, and it's actually it was planned years ago with the Graves Trust. So it was a long time ago. It was built to serve a large area. It takes a lot of water. It's been actually built once and flooded once and had some challenges with it. They had to get it rebuilt. So it's actually been built even better than it was before, such that it can take on more water than it used to be able to. And it actually has been tested the last few years from what we can tell and the pictures we've been given by some of the Mariposa residents. So it's actually performing well. We're glad about that because the city has a vested interest in that pond. We're sharing the costs of paying for it, which means the city taxpayers have a vested interest through the city staff to try and do the right thing here. So we try not to be, I guess, biased to a certain extent. We want development or don't want development. These ponds we have to maintain, so we have to figure out, are they going to work? So this one is a good example of a large pond. We just took a survey of it to make sure it doesn't flood anybody. Mr. Smith lives right here. He was concerned that, if this pond floods, it floods my house. Well, luckily it does not. It goes over the tops. If it plugs it over tops, it doesn't flood anybody. So it doesn't flood anybody in Mariposa. It doesn't flood anybody here. It goes downstream to the Smoky Hill River. So it's a big concern, but it is something that we have to keep an eye on, inspect, just to make sure it's still functioning. So far, so good on that. Next slide, Dustin. Okay. Hopefully you can just scroll through them. There you go. Next one. Okay, here's our city drainage criteria. Okay, so we have coefficients, and Dr. Hankey and Mr. Owens and Mr. Blanchard have talked about this, and it's a science, but it's also, as you can see, the first one is residential development, 0.4 to 0.6. That's the options you have. So if you're a aggressive engineer, you say, oh, by golly, it's only 0.4 all the time. I don't ever want to have to build anything very big. Well, you try to look at, from a city staff perspective, we try to have, 0.4 to 0.5 typically is normal. 0.6 is pretty high, so you don't see that a lot unless you've got a lot of houses packed together in more of an urban setting. So there's a lot of engineering judgment on that. Campbell and Johnson from 2008 went through that. They went through kind of the calculations of a reasonable house, a driveway, amount of lawn, a roof. So they did all those calculations, followed these criteria, and came up with some numbers. So from the city staff perspective, we have to say, okay, did they follow the criteria? Did they do it reasonably in some fashion? And then they have to put their seal on it. So if you, Dustin, did you move down? Is that what you just did? Let's see, it looks like. Tried to expand it. Okay, yeah, it is hard to see. You'll see in here as well as there's multifamily, detached multifamily. So now we're looking at that for phase 3 is maybe more closer together houses, not duplexes, but just a little more closer together houses. And it's, what does that say, Dustin? Oh, I've got it here. Sorry. .4 to 0.6, 0.5 to 0.6. So for multifamily units detached, 0.5 to 0.6. So we're at 0.52. Again, these are not, we don't feel like they're, I guess, real dense, I guess you'd say. In Salina's terms, we're pretty flat, we're pretty open. And historically, these numbers are fairly conservative. So I guess what I'm getting at is this is our criteria. They follow it. If it's in those ranges, we have a hard time saying you're wrong or you screwed up or go back to the drawing board. We have to kind of work. How'd you come up with those numbers? What was your impervious areas? Okay, that sidewalk doesn't go there. So we don't put a sidewalk around a cul-de-sac. So that was one of the things that came up with Mr. Owens' study of how much sidewalk area was there. Well, he had sidewalk going around the cul-de-sac, and he had some patio sizes that were on the large end. So we looked at those things, and we went back and forth. And we typically do that with any study we get. We have to look out for the interest of the community, as well as we're engineers as well. So maybe we're a little overzealous on that regard. We could just accept what they give us and say, great. We feel like it's doing our job. I've got Wayne Nelson as a good staff member that goes through this with me and myself. And so we typically have some kind of dialogue or review or red lines, and sometimes engineers get overzealous on red lines, so that's just the way it goes. But engineers push back on us too, so it's a dialogue. So that's where we ended up with Justin on the 0.52. The 0.53 could have been reasonable as well. We just went through the calculations and became 0.52. Go to the next slide, Dustin. What I'm doing with the, could you guys, is that the bottom of the page? Yeah, that's the bottom. Right, so that's the, when we have design parameters for driveways and roofs, you'll see that those numbers are on the high end. So asphalt surface 0.95, roof area 1, and those are pretty high numbers. So in the realm of engineering, I'm going to show you a few other slides later here. Those are as conservative as you can get in the nation. So we'll go to the next slide. And those are the City of Salina criteria. Let's go to the next slide. Go past that one, Dustin. Sorry, that's not the one I want to. Keep going, keep going, keep going. There should be some other pages. There we go. That one there. So that one is a slide from a design manual that a lot of engineers use called Lindbergh. And Lindbergh has, for a shingle roof, for an asphalt road, they have 0.7 to 0.95 for an asphalt road. That's a range. So shingle roof is the same, 0.75 to 0.95 for a shingle roof. So they have more ranges. It's allowed most of the time, depending on how stringent your city is, you go to one or the other, but most engineering manuals have ranges. And so we're on the very conservative end of that range. I just wanted to let people know that. So we try to feel like we are conservative. We are trying to look out for the best interest that we can, but we are a little bit conservative in that regard. So it makes things bigger, makes things, cost a little bit more, that kind of thing. So we have to balance that with development as well. But that's just an example that we have for, and you'll see the main thing there, single-family residential right here, 0.3 to 0.5. So 0.45, the original study in 2008, 0.45 was on the higher end of that portion when compared with averages around the nation. The next one, Dustin, is just another example of that. Just a different community that has similar numbers. They're the same. So if you look up in any manual, these are the numbers you're going to see. Salinas are on the conservative end. They're a little bit higher. So I just want people to understand that. And then lastly, we go to the areas in this subdivision. So go back up to the top, Dustin. Got a map there. We did look at five or six. Yeah, this is it. All these houses are built. So they're, Dr. Hankey and Mr. Blanchard are correct on that. We looked at the different, kind of the lot coverage and what's the other number? It's site coverage and lot coverage. It's a planning term. So if you look at a lot of these, we came up with around 31% for a total, what does it say, Dustin? Is that site coverage or lot coverage? Which one's the bigger one?
Site coverage is the larger one. Site coverage, you're going to add in your other.
Right. Dustin said site coverage is everything. It's your patio, your driveway, your outbuildings, your roof, it's everything. Whereas lot coverage is just the habitable structure, I believe. So, but either way, we did not get to 35%. We got to 31 to 32 at the max that we could find. We did find one that is over 35 out there, but the majority of them were not over 35, and most of them were in the 20s. I shouldn't say most. It's just an average. So you could look at, I looked at 4 more today just to make sure, and I was still around 31, 32%. So I guess just to be fair, I don't disagree with Dr. Hankey and Mr. Blanchard looking at that and saying, yeah, we've got these numbers. So, but 35% doesn't seem to be a fair, from an engineer's perspective, that's probably not what you'd go with because that's the max. And I guess there is a max of 45%. I did see that in the planning, but we didn't find anybody that was in that regard. So that's just one factor to consider, though. Because when an engineer has to consider the factors of drainage, they have to look at one of the factors is fraction of imperviousness. That's just one of 5 factors. They look at soil type, surface cover, the recurrence interval, the storm, antecedent moisture conditions, rainfall intensity, drainage area, and slope. So there's a lot of things they have to take into account for the different drainage calculations. So I guess I don't disagree with just going out there and saying this is the impervious area. Yep, got it. But there's a lot of other things to consider as well. So I guess in summary, hopefully I've answered the question about why 2008. Looking at 2008 and looking at it again and seeing if it was correct, we feel like it was a good study. It's similar to what our city staff looked at, as well as Mr. Owens looked at, as well as what Bucher, Willis, and Ratliff looked at when they originally, the Graves Trust built these ponds and looked at these drainage areas. So we feel like 4 engineers, I guess, have looked at this over the last 30 or 40 years, and nothing new under the sun there, really. But to be fair to everybody, yeah, those ponds, they fill up, they flood, they may get overtopped, they have to be maintained. So it's just something that's an ongoing battle and something that we have to continually monitor, and the city is responsible for maintaining those 2 ponds in this subdivision. So we don't want to say we have a biased opinion or unfair view on it, because we got to deal with them if they get messed up. So we're not trying to overtop them, or not trying to allow development that's going to kill the ponds. It is, it's a close calculation. So when I look at Dustin, could you go up a little bit more? Look at one of the maps I put up here. This has been in your packet before, but it's this map right here. It just kind of shows the areas. So it's just an odd situation. A lot of times you have a subdivision where everything drains to a pond that's at the end of the subdivision. You put the pond at the bottom of the subdivision, wherever that is. In a lot of subdivisions, that's where it is. That way they can control the runoff from their subdivision, from most of it, and release it at a controlled rate. Well, this is, as you can see, it's a really weird configuration, as you've already talked about with cul-de-sac links and road links. Points. So one of them being here, this is one we're really focused on right here. This whole area, this phase 3 replat, drains to here. It doesn't even get to the pond. That is correct. So what the engineer had to do was mitigate a whole bunch of water over here to make up for that one and this one here. There's an outlet here as well, but there's an outlet. This water all gets to this spot. So these 2 spots are undetained, I guess you'd say. So we have to make amenities for slowing down the water, or putting riprap dams in there. Energy dissipation is what they call it a lot of times. And that may look like a small pond to a planter. I don't know, but that's what we have to do to slow down the water in those areas. This one is built to a certain level. It hasn't been all the way built out, but it has been built to a rock dam. It's about 2.5 foot deep rock dam that's there now. So it's still on that property there. It hasn't actually come all the way out to hole 12 per se. It's close, but it actually hasn't got out onto that property yet. With the process, there was an easement granted from the golf course for that area. So in phase 3, no matter how phase 3 gets built, whether it's 19 lots or 30 lots, we're going to have to build that last portion of it and mitigate that drainage, because not all the drainage is getting to it right now. Just half of it's getting to it now. The rest of it will get there when we build phase 3. So yeah, it's an odd situation. These ponds are here. They take 22 acres of drainage from Mr. Hayworth's property just up the stream. They take a bunch of water that comes through there, and they slow it down and stop it basically in those ponds and discharge it at a little under unmitigated or undetained, and come out really fast. But the bottom line is the math works out to where Mariposa is getting less water than it used to get, used to get based on the whole drainage area and all these different drainage patterns, because they were able to reduce a little bit with that pond and discharge it at a controlled rate. So that's why we feel like we have some margin for increased lots in this area. Now, granted, it's close, and yeah, it starts to get 30 lots, I guess, like Justin calculated, it's within the, 1% either way, depending on which number you use, but it's pretty close. It fits in the pond, and with the different drainage things that, or drainage criteria that I mentioned that go into it, we feel like from the city staff that they did a good job with it. It's good numbers, and it's where we end up. So I thank you for your time, and I'll entertain any more questions. That was a long answer to your question, but I feel like I had to go through Drainage 101 here a little bit, and I'll do this again the next time if we need a study session on it, because if we need different criteria, we want different things as a city, that's what we can do. But right now, that's where we're at.
No, I appreciate you answering that for me.
I do have a concern, considering the site coverage. We
Yes.
looked at properties in Grand Prairie, but being that the Mariposa Pond serves more than just Grand Prairie, do we have any more densely covered areas potentially in Mariposa area that would be putting more water into that pond than was designed for?
There is one block, yeah, thanks, Dustin, probably kind of right over here behind, I can't remember what it's called, Block 5 of Mariposa. So there is some planned development for that area. It was originally planned as some multifamily or maybe higher density housing. It hasn't been developed yet. And then, like we said earlier, the Hayworth property upstream. So I guess those are things we'll have to look at if they develop or when they developed. Interestingly, that pond was built to handle all that supposedly. So I guess we'll get to see. We haven't actually looked at kind of where those end up, but Mariposa Pond currently has quite a bit of margin in it because it's been built well and it's been reconstructed, and it's a little bigger than they had originally planned it. So we feel like it's got some margin, but yeah, we'll have to see about that margin. Just like in this case, we had a little margin with these ponds, and now it's pretty well used up if this phase 3 replat goes through.
One concern I keep hearing is that the residents have actually seen the pond, and they showed us a picture, although there wasn't a date on it. And so I guess, do you know how often that happens, or would you guys address how often that happens? I mean, is it after a 2-inch rain, or was it July 4th last year?
Chris Carlson, Grass. Do you want to know about the rivers, or do you want to know about the ponds filling up? Because you can also go to the golf site, municipal golf course. They've actually have pictures on their sites of where the rain has rivered and collected. So most of these, I believe, are pictures from the various neighbors. And it depends which one you're talking about, because sent to me has been from, Chan, Gary's, Mariposa, yours.
There was one handed to us last year, or one of the first, maybe second meeting, and
Last year when we had, every picture you've been shown were with the rains that we had last year. They've all, because most of us are all new out there anyway. But yeah, those are all pictures of last year when we just had that little bit of a rainy year. So, and why I'm up here, can I ask you a question? So you guys have not taken into consideration, even though they're tearing down all the trees and they're moving forward with the townhomes and the stuff with Hayworth, that has not been considered along with doubling lots for the water. Am I correct? Did you just say that?
Yeah, that property hasn't been to you all for a plat, I don't believe. Cedar Ridge, what's it called, Dustin? Cedar Point. Has Cedar Point been here yet?
yeah, we saw that.
Preliminary plat.
Preliminary plat, okay. Yeah, so we've looked at that. They've got they basically, everyone who plats a property, in that case, they were not, they're putting in their own, they're proposing their own pond. So that helps in the case of Cedar Point. They'd actually have a pond. Cedar Point is the Hayworth property where they're clearing some trees right now, I believe.
Well, they're doing the two.
Are they doing both?
Please, thank you.
Okay, there's two. There is one that would be just, tell me the direction of Stratman, just south of us, and then there's Hayworth's down on the bottom. And I know they were gonna have a pond, but I've not heard about the other section of Hayworth that they're clearing out that would be off of hole 5. Between, where does your mom and dad live? What's that called? Briar?
I think they have 2.
Briar Gate. So it's between us and Briar Gate. There's a whole new, you guys had a sign that it's supposed to be coming for zoning or replat, but that is part of this Hayworth deal.
That one was.
So, and that is above us that will be coming down.
It's got 2 cul-de-sacs.
Yeah, I had 2 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That has 2 retention ponds, by the way, when it was brought to us.
The one on
The
hole
pre-
5,
The preliminary one with Hayworth has 2 retention ponds.
okay.
That sticks in my mind because it was an additional thing that they put in there that really wasn't required.
Okay, and we're talking about the area between Briar Gate and Grand Prairie, not the, across the street, Cedar Point,
Right.
the one.
It's the new Hayworth edition, and
The one that's shown right here on the,
Right there.
I don't know how,
No,
we're starting to
I-
kind of delve into territory that
No, that is not the one I'm talking about.
isn't really part of that.
Oh,
You
well,
see
I
it-
just was
you see where
asking if we're doing this, he says
Right.
we're at the max in this drainage, and you guys, it's going forward, the sign's been up there, but that's not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about the one, am I saying that right? North or south? Yeah, there's actually 2 areas. So I'm just asking if that was taken into consideration when we talk about this drainage, because they are at a higher elevation than we are.
What I can tell you is the preliminary plat had 2 retention ponds. And per the engineers, it was not required, only 1, but they'd gone a little above and beyond on the drainage and the engineering. But again, we're talking about a whole different project, and I feel like we're kind of delving into a territory where we're just kind of out in left field at this point.
I was trying to ask just a simple question.
I understand.
You just said the max in Grand Prairie, so I'll just clarify. The max, you're maxed out in Grand Prairie with the development you have, and then they have, anybody who develops uphill of you has to have a pond as well to keep it the same, so they don't kill downstream, which it's an iterative process as you move up the hill. So yeah, they have ponds proposed in that as well. And we'd have to look at that if somebody else proposes or whoever else plats. So it's drainage always, you have to look at have to look at it each time, so, yes.
Don Wendt, Bentgrass Drive. I just wanted to address your question directly. I've been a little over 4 years, and 3 times the ponds have been up to the very top in the 4-year period.
Okay, good to know. And then from what I heard from Mr. Stack, they haven't flooded, but, I mean, you've seen it maxed out, sounds like. But,
Right.
But are you aware of anyone being flooded?
No. As I said, when those ponds were in that condition, the city of Salina, there could be some localized flooding in some areas that flood all the time, but as this, as a considered flood or the rain for a flood, there wasn't. But they are up to the top, and thank goodness my house has a higher elevation that if it floods, it'll have to, we'd have a total disaster if my house flooded, but again, the concern is we're adding to that.
That makes sense, and I can appreciate that concern.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know we had some big rains last year, and
We did.
I kind of think nationwide we should go to something greater than 25 years.
Right. Yeah, some cities have gone from 10 to 25. Salina went to 25 in the late 90s. So it was a big change. It's a lot bigger ponds. From an engineer's perspective, we're happy when they take the water they're supposed to, but they don't break and cause problems downstream. So those, when they get to the top, then they have an overflow into this big grate. And so you'll see them get to that level fairly, depending on the rains, but they'll get to that level and then they'll go in there's the large grates, and so then they don't overtop. So that's the way Mariposa works as well. So they brought a video of that last year when we had a really big July storm. We were just glad to see that it worked like it was supposed to. Per the design, it worked really well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stack.
Thank you.
Public comment? Yeah, go ahead.
So, Mr. Stack, and clarify me if I'm wrong. So we feel like it's pretty misleading to just say we're talking about coefficients falling in the acceptable range that the city set. That's not what we're looking at. The coefficient is just a factor that goes into a formula. That being peak flow, or Q, equals the coefficient times the rainfall intensity times the area. The outcome of that is what matters, not the coefficient. And we're going over that. We're going over the peak flow, and it's being dumped directly on the golf course by 65% of the property. It doesn't meet the subdivision regulations for stormwater management. I appreciate that you brought up kind of the outcome of that formula. We're going over it with the current conditions of how we're building. And also, Bob Hayworth and his property, he is responsible for making that detention pond. And he did. I think he's giving a 100-year pond, or if I heard that correctly at previous meetings. We aren't covering our subdivision regulations because our pond doesn't catch everything. It just dumps directly on the golf course. The Mariposa Pond is downstream, but the golf course is a victim in all of this, with the access road, all of the detention, or the water runoff, it just floods it. And so we're not meeting our subdivision regulations. And like I said, the coefficient is just one factor that goes into a formula. The rainfall intensity is time of concentration, length, and slope of the property. He's not commenting on that.
Thank you.
Do you want to comment on peak flow?
What was the actual question in that, I guess?
I think there's concern that the water is dumping on the golf course because of.
No, he's correct, yeah. It's, the water goes from those spots that I said, that goes directly to the golf course, higher than it used to. That's correct. So total-wise, they had to mitigate a whole bunch from somewhere else, basically upstream, to slow it down and put it in the ponds to make the overall number be the same as it was before, basically. So it's different. It was, but it was taken into consideration. And so each place that dumps on the golf course, we have to mitigate it and dissipate it like different than before. So it's just part of what this design, or what this plat originally thought of in 2008.
So you're saying it's an ongoing mitigation?
Well, yeah, we haven't built the phase 3 portion, so that'll have to be a rock check dam there to slow the water down. And it's got a small one there now, but we'll have to build the bigger one and finish it all up. And then the city has a vested interest in it because it's our property. So if we cause problems on hole 12, then it's going to be a problem for a lot of golfers and the rest of us. So when it rains, definitely the water runs through the golf course. It's a irrigated course, so it seems like it rains a little bit, it floods. I wouldn't say floods, but that's just part of the way golf courses are. They're usually pretty saturated with water, so when it rains, they run water a lot. So it's, I don't know what else to say other than, whether it meets our regulations. We're reviewing it to see that it meets the time of concentrations and the flow rates. And then in this case, this pond doesn't, but he's right, this pond doesn't take the water even from this phase. He's correct. So that's a correct statement. But that was originally intended in 2008. So
Just as a point of clarity, the mitigation needs to happen regardless of lot sizes and
correct.
the houses.
Yes, that's correct. It's going to happen either way, whatever size we build. We have to have. It's already been designed in there, and it's a rock check dam, and it'll slow the water down and should function.
Is what's on the screen, we all receive that here at our table. Is that a design or existing?
Yeah. There it is. Yeah, that's the design that's currently, that was designed in 2008. That's in the plans. So it's interesting when you get a large set of plans and it's phased construction. So you don't build everything at the same time. You build the stuff you have to do that phase, and then you defer some things till later. So yeah, that actually, in that location, hasn't been built yet, but it's been built.
There is an existing easement.
Yeah,
over
there's an easement here, and this pipe has been built from 07 through about to here. They just haven't done the junction box, and they haven't put it over to here with the large check dam. It's a smaller check dam here currently. It's just not taken all the water yet, so they haven't put in the large check dam yet. But that will be the next step. Whenever we build phase 3, we got to put that in.
Okay. Thank you.
And the question is, does it detain a 25-year flood? No, it definitely does not. That's the 25-year flood detaining is down at the other two ponds, basically. But yeah, that flow rate will be higher than it was before in that location. Any other questions?
I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Discussion, I'm sure is in order.
I think we would have to make a motion first to have a discussion.
Oh.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Greg Binkson, City Legal Counsel. The question is what prompted me to come up. In that procedure, this is strictly a procedural point, but when the motion to reconsider was approved, it literally brings you back to the point just immediately preceding the prior vote. So in this unique circumstance, you technically have two motions currently on the table. The motions that were considered and approved at your prior meeting are now resurrected, if you will. They are before you in the form that they were originally made. So it's yours to either vote or further discussion, amendment of the motion, whatever avenue you might choose to take if you were taken back to that point in time, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does.
The only other additional point that if, after your deliberations and if your vote is to not approve the plat, it is your responsibility to articulate the reasons based upon the subdivision regulations that you've found to be not to conform to. So, thank you.
Greg, I'm sorry, real quick before you go, can we just clarify then? So the original motion, for instance, related to the acceptance of a variance for the maximum street length was moved by Commissioner Olson, seconded by Gilmore. Does that stand, or do those motions need to be made and seconded again?
No, they stand.
Okay.
It's as though we're right back to the point where the original vote occurred.
So just to remind the commission, and as it was noted in the staff report for the reconsideration in the packet, the motion for acceptance of the variations to the maximum street length of 600 feet on the dead-end cul-de-sac on Bentgrass Drive and the variance of the requirements for a 100-foot tangent length between street curves was made by Commissioner Olson and seconded by Commissioner Gilmore. And then the other motion, which was made by Commissioner Olson and seconded by Chair Linkowitz, is move to approve the amended application number P08-2B filed by William Shepard requesting the approval of a replat of lots 18 through 36 in Block 2 of the Grand Prairie Edition, subject to recommendations on page 5 through 6 of the staff report. I would like to, if the commission were to take a friendly amendment, particularly the motion maker, on the one related to variations for the street length and tangent length, I would suggest that motion be amended to recognize the findings. So, because you did have findings in your packet which were used to make that decision, and it's important, I think, in rereading this motion to recognize those findings as part of that motion. So it could read acceptance of variations based on the findings to maximum street length of 600 feet of the dead-end cul-de-sac on Bentgrass Drive and the variations of the requirements of the 100-foot tangent length between street curves.
So you just need me to approve that if I want to have that read that way?
Yes, if you're willing to take that
I would-
recommended.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Greg.
Jump in. I think we should, in that the motion is back before you as it was originally presented and originally voted on.
Okay.
The only additional point I was going to make, it takes you back to that point in time, but it doesn't mean you have to vote immediately. You're able to debate, you're able to ask questions, you're able to do anything you might have chosen to do at that point in time based on what you've heard today. If there is a desire to amend the motion as has been suggested, I would recommend that that be in the form of a motion to amend the primary motion, just to address that. You would then vote on that amendment. It either passes or not, and you go forward. So.
All right, thank you very much. So we have a motion for that.
Yeah, so then I make a motion to accept the variances based on the findings for the maximum street length of 600 feet of the dead-end cul-de-sac on Bentgrass Drive and the variance of the requirement of the 100-foot tangent length between street curves.
So motion to amend the primary motion made by Commissioner Olson. You would then need a second motion for the amendment to the primary
I'll second it.
motion.
Point of order, Commissioner Bappa, didn't we not vote on this already?
Right, that's what I
So
was
we're-
thinking. When we arrived tonight, I thought.
Where we're doing it, kind of a point of clarity, because there were some modifications in the original meeting.
No, I mean, didn't we vote today to approve the variances?
I don't recall that.
I don't recall that. My understanding is that we made a motion earlier to reconsider.
Yeah.
So that we could rehear, so that we could have the public comment, because we had situations where the audio part wasn't clear, so we basically said we're starting back over to re-listen to all of that, which is why we listened to the meeting initially.
Yeah, that
So
was
we're
vote
now
number
back-
one.
Huh?
That was vote number one, and then we had another vote. We had two votes today. Is that not correct?
I don't remember voting, I mean, I remember the motion to rehear what we heard last time. That was kind of where my understanding is where we've been through this whole time. And we've listened to everything so that we had the public comment. And now we're back up to the point of, since we re-listened to everything, we're now going back up to the two initial motions that we had from the meeting on the 2nd, which was the first motion of that would have to be redo the variance because for the replatting part of it, we would have to approve those variances to allow the replat to go through if that's the way that vote would move. So all this does is allows us to move forward to either make a motion and then take a vote on whether we want to allow the replat to occur. Is that correct?
That's my understanding of it.
Correct. You need to act on both these items again, since you chose to reconsider both of them again. And I didn't mean to throw a spanner in the works, but before you had the motion on the floor and got into discussion, in just having time after the meeting to really look at this, I recognize that having the word findings in there is much more particular. I mean, it's a motion you can either, it's an amendment you can take or not, but just our thought was, you use those findings to make that decision. If so, it's worth noting it in the motion. And so if you were going to have discussion about the motion, I thought it might be prevalent to have that comment at this time. I see Mr. Bankston who may want to add information to that. Greg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I may, my main concern is just making sure that I'm keeping up. Was the motion that was just made to amend
Primary.
the main motion to
Yes.
include reference to the findings?
To the findings, yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So you will vote on whether to amend the main motion as has been moved, but you will regardless of the outcome of that, whether it's amended or not, you'll then have before you still the main motion. Is everybody with me on that?
Yes.
Mr. Baffa?
I'm sorry, I'm not.
Yeah. The confusing part is, I think, the effect of the motion to reconsider. It just takes you right back to before the vote was taken, back at your last meeting, as though someone has made that motion.
And we did that already.
Right, you adopted the motion to reconsider. So that's what precipitated the discussion and viewing the video and everything that's transpired so far. So with that motion to reconsider, it's a little cumbersome because there were two motions that you acted upon and that you chose to reconsider, the first of which had to do with the variations. So that's back before you without even anybody having made the motion. It's resurrected, if you will, from your prior meeting. So we now have a motion to amend that motion to make reference to the findings that were in the staff report. So the question before you by virtue of this motion would be whether to amend the main motion to include that language referring to the findings. If that passes, you're then back to the amended main motion, and it would be appropriate then to vote on that. If what you're about to vote on fails, the main motion then stands as originally moved at your prior meeting.
I think I got it.
Well, if you have questions, it is a rather confusing circumstance. So don't hesitate to say if there's any question.
So, all right, when we passed the reconsideration or motion, that really negated the June 2nd meeting.
It negated the vote.
Okay.
It didn't take away the motion. That's the kind of confusing part about a motion to reconsider. It takes you back to the moment before you voted in that last meeting.
I see.
Is where it takes you.
Okay.
It doesn't take a new motion being made. You're literally right back to where the vote was taken. So that's what brought us here. And then now we have this motion to amend that motion. So that's really the only question before you now, is whether to amend that motion to include the reference to the findings. Once that's decided, we'll be back to the main motion, and we can talk about that then.
Hey, Greg.
I don't necessarily believe so, no. Before a vote is taken, I don't think so.
What was the question? Sorry, I didn't hear.
I'm sorry. I just was, because Mr. Baffa, you have questions, I'm sure the rest of you do. The motion to reconsider, as council said, brings you back to the point where you made the motion and you made the second and you're ready to vote. Anytime during that, I just wanted clarification that the motion maker and the motion seconder weren't bound to that motion and second. They could withdraw their motion. So your two options would basically be you could withdraw your motion and the second's automatically withdrawn and then make your just a different motion, or the person that seconded could withdraw a second and you'd be back to making a motion.
So instead of doing an amended, I just withdraw the original one and then start a motion again.
You could do that. You could just withdraw your motion instead of making it ultra, because it seems like there's confusion as to how many times you're going to vote on something.
I think we need some clarity on that, Mr. Bankston.
Well, I had suggested, it is the more strict parliamentary procedural rule to vote on any motion to amend, rather than simply leaving it to the movant to withdraw the motion and presumably make a new one. Don't mean to make it harder. I was particularly concerned since the original motion was from your prior meeting, and that's the motion that was the consequence of the motion to reconsider. So I think as far as we've gone, from a parliamentary standpoint and for the record, I would suggest acting on the motion to amend.
I think we're on the same page. Thank you.
And I would agree, and I would keep my motion the same.
And I will keep my second. No, this is the motion to amend. Do you mind stepping up so I can? No, okay. Okay. It's not the original vote. This is a motion to amend the original motion. There's some language variance that will clarify some things.
I didn't get that you were the second. My apologies.
Yeah.
That's okay. Well, now I'm starting to second guess myself. So
You were the
we're
second.
good. I was the second. I'm just kidding around. But
So, discussion?
are we all on the same page here with what this is about and why we're doing it as far as this motion to amend the original language?
This is just the language alone.
It's just the language. It is not
We're not
pertaining
voting on the
to
action.
the actual vote.
Okay.
It's more just to amend the language.
Okay.
So I guess we do a roll call vote, I'm assuming?
Yep.
Markey?
All right. Baffa?
Yes.
Bernhardt?
Yes.
Good?
Yes.
Linkwitz?
Yes.
Lang?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Gilmore?
Yes.
Motion passes.
So actually, one point of discussion before we get in, do we want to take a break before we delve into this? Or do we just want to jump in?
I'm good, but I think let everybody else decide.
Sooner we get home, the better.
Okay, I just want to make sure we're on the same page.
So we have the amended motion. So do we have to bring that back up now then?
So those motions are on the floor. Greg's heading up to clarify, but like he said,
We're up
those
for discussion
motions
on it.
exist. You've amended the primary motion, and the first one that you were dealing with is related to the variations from the maximum street length and the variation to the tangent length. And if you want, we could read that into the record if that would help.
I would suggest doing so.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to read that motion in the record, or do you want me to? Okay. So the new motion would be for acceptance of the variation due to the findings to the maximum street length of 600 feet of a dead-end cul-de-sac on Bentgrass Drive and the variation of the requirement for 100-foot tangent length between street curves. And the only difference between what was discussed on June 2nd, now made by amendment, is that word findings. And those findings are specifically in the packet and were required by code as in recognizing why those variations would be allowed.
So then, do I make that motion again then?
Nope,
don't
motion's
have
on the
to.
floor. You're at
it's out there.
discussion now.
At discussion, okay, good.
So who wants to start? Obviously, some discussion is merited.
My concern that has arisen from this meeting after reconsidering is I really have issue with the traffic counts, I feel. You know, there's been discussion and it's been brought up on multiple occasions that 600-foot distance is based on traffic. And even looking at the replat of these lots, that would be an additional 10 lots, and throwing out the 55 and over, knowing that that can't be policed, that anybody is going to be able to live in that house. You can't use that number. That's going to bring an additional 100 cars to this cul-de-sac.
Any other thoughts, considerations?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that you're gonna add, with 11 additional houses, you'll have additional cars, those things going into it. But it's gonna be similar to other neighborhoods, depending on the people that are living there. If you have kids, you're gonna have typically more traffic during early mornings, you're gonna have traffic during afternoon type situations. If you have a 55, it doesn't mean that they're not gonna be traveling. I mean, they could be out and about and doing as much as anybody else is. I mean, I think from what we at least heard initially on the traffic flow part of it, from, I think it's Justin with Call Valley, is that if we look at the point where you have the phase 1, the phase 2, and everything coming into it, you have a stick point there, but at that point, the information we were provided was that was still low total volume moving in and out of that area.
I'm looking at, there's currently 74 lots, I believe. And with the replat would go to 85. And so if you were to look at that and say, okay, even just worst case scenario is you've got 85 homes there. Worst case, each home has 2 adults that are working and come home at 5 o'clock. That's 170 cars coming through one point after 5 o'clock.
Correct, but even in your own neighborhood, do you have all of your neighbors come home at exactly the
No,
same time?
but I'm saying worst case.
Yeah, and I agree, worst case
We have to
scenario
look
would be
at
that.
worst case.
But that's part of the traffic flows going into, that they were looking at worst-case scenarios, and based on the number of houses that you have and whatever the type of housing it is, that is what those formulas are designed to address.
But I don't feel that the formulas take into account the cul-de-sac. I mean, for normal neighborhoods, yes, you've got 2 points of entry for every single neighborhood. Whereas this one, you only have this 1 point of entry for these 85 lots.
Well, it's not total 80, well, you've got 1 point of entry going into it, but then you have some that are gonna be veering off into phase 1, some that will be moving into phase 2, and then you will have additional ones that are going into phase 3. So not all of them are going the same direction.
But
They all
they
come
are
in the
all-
same area. They all come in the same area and they come back out, but at some point, they're gonna be going in different directions.
Right, and that's not my concern. My concern is that 1 point of entry and exit.
Yeah, and that's why everybody has opinions, and I guess I don't see it as an issue overall, but that's why we have the discussion and allow everybody to have a say and a vote on how they feel about it. I don't disagree with you. I mean, I just don't see that you're gonna have that many people flowing in and out all at the exact same time.
I mean, take for example, what if there's a fire on the golf course? Or there's a wildfire that's coming and everybody's gotta be evacuated. I mean, there's emergencies that could arise where people have to get out of there.
They do, and that's where the emergency access road is actually, I mean, they don't have the padlock, but it could be actually used to.
Well, if the
go back
wildfire's
out of it.
coming across the golf course,
Could,
they're
depending
down
on
to
the
this
direction.
one entry.
Right. It's no different than Bill Burke. You got Bill Burke Park, and you've got people playing baseball, and you've got one entrance. And all of those cars moving in and out of there.
And it's a nightmare.
It is at times, yep. But you have all of those games going off at the same time, starting at the same time, stopping at the same time, where you don't have residents that are always going in and out of an area at the same time. I mean, you're gonna have people leaving for work, but you have some that'll leave at 7, some that'll leave at 7:30, some that are leaving at 6, some that are leaving at 8 o'clock. I mean, it's never the same time for all situations.
Actually, that brings up a question. because it seems like we may have a little bit of a comparable and we could utilize here in town. Highland Meadows Hamlet, do we have access to how many lots are in that particular subdivision? I'm sorry to do that, it just,
No, we don't know off the top of our head, but we can check while you continue discussion.
That's, yeah.
that's a subdivision I personally lived in, and it's one point of entry, one point of exit. You know, I don't recall it being a problem, but again, it's, you know, as far as a reference point, the number of lots, I'm not 100% sure how comparable they are, but I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers are close. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many are in there.
Well, the nice thing with a cul-de-sac is that you don't have a lot of flow-through traffic like you would with a two entrance.
Right.
Well, I think one thing worth mentioning is, I mean, there's, you know, perfect world scenario. We can oversee all these things and you have optimal conditions in every single subdivision and everything's perfect. And obviously not the world we live in, and there's a limit to our oversight, which I think's a good thing. I don't want to be in charge of how many cars can drive through every subdivision.
Right.
I wouldn't want to live in a subdivision where a governing body like ours could tell us how many cars can come and go. Seems a little over officious to me. There's just some factors we can't control. And I guess the question is, those additional homes versus the original plot, and how much of a variance or difference that's going to make in traffic flow. I mean, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the other thing
is that going to make on everybody?
The other thing that I would look at is on the variance part for the 600-foot for the end of cul-de-sac and the 100-foot tangent. More of that was designed for the emergency access part of it, less for the traffic flow, where that part of it's, if the replat doesn't go through, those variances are still going to sit there for the existing platted 18 property or plats that are there. So I guess really for the traffic flow part of it, to me, that would come more into, do you allow the replat part of it?
And see, I disagree. I think that the tangents, yes, that is specifically for emergency access vehicles as well as just line of sight for normal traffic. However, I feel that the 600-foot length of cul-de-sac, I really do think that has an effect on, or is a product of the traffic flow itself. It makes a lot of sense to me. Because as it was spoken, I mean, if you've got a regular everyday cul-de-sac with 10 lots on either side of it, you've got 20 lots. That's the end of the story with a 600-foot cul-de-sac. But where you're looking at going from 600 to 2,800, and now looking at reducing lot size, and I mean, yes, that's another point altogether that we have to make a decision on next, but that's drastically a lot more traffic than you would see on a 600-foot cul-de-sac. Right.
But the issue still is just the 11 additional lots for the replat part of it. Because even if we deny this motion, the 600-foot variance for the existing plat is still in effect.
If you deny what? Say that again, please.
Well, right now, what we're looking at is, since the topic was brought up to replat Phase 3 from 19 lots to 30 lots, that's the reason we're looking at the variance for the maximum street length of 600 feet and the 100-foot tangents. If we deny the replat, there is, on the original platting of this property, there is an existing maximum street, cul-de-sac street variance length of 600 foot and 100-foot tangent. That, we don't change that because that's already in place. So if we're saying that's an issue for 19, or for 30 lots, it's gonna be the same issue for the 19 additional lots that are there and the existing people that are already there for phase 2. So that, if we deny the replat, that part still sits there because that was part of the original platting of that property.
It doesn't sit there.
Yes,
Sir-
it does.
so are you
We're not
sa-
changing the 600-foot, the exemption for the 600-foot cul-de-sac. On the existing plat, it still stays there.
Right.
We're only readdressing it because that we had the motion to replat those 19 to 30. If we deny the replat, the property stays exactly the way it is, and there's already the variance for the 600 feet and the 100-foot tangents because of the emergency access.
Are you trying to say maybe we should vote on the replat first?
No, you still have to do the variance first because you have to have the variance to allow the replat. But if you deny the replat, then the 600 variance that's already existing, not the one that we're voting on right now, will sit there. If you move that away, then he doesn't have phase 3 at all. And that's already been approved. So the only thing we're looking,
If we deny the variation here,
it doesn't change the
no,
existing
let me
one.
finish, please. If we deny the variation here, it is already approved with the previously platted phase 3. So he can move on with the previously platted phase 3. It won't
Right.
come back up.
Right. Yeah, the only thing we're doing is which is my point, is it's already, if we deny the replat, the variance is already there for the existing platting. We're only looking at the variance for the replat. So it's already been approved for the existing part of it. So we have to reapprove it to replat, to allow the replat to come through. So before we can vote on the replat, we have to allow the variance. If we decline the 600-foot and the 100-foot tangent for this part of it, then the replat doesn't go through either. But it'll still revert back to the existing platting, and there's still a 600-foot variance for the cul-de-sac and the 100-foot tangent, because it's the same street. Nothing changes on the street except for the number of properties on the back end of it.
Correct. However, I feel that by turning down the variations, that it is based on the fact of the traffic flow. And I mean, that could come from having 74 lots, that could come from having 85 lots. With the example of having a normal cul-de-sac with 20 homes, that's 64 vehicles a day based on these numbers. Well, I take that back. That's the 20 lot
Markley, Cedar
Yeah.
Ridge and Markley?
Oh, yeah.
Commissioner
Yeah.
Bernhardt, just at a real quick, I want to clarify, this is not pulling building permit numbers or anything like that, because I can't do
Yeah.
that on the fly. But if we do a quick rooftop count of aerial images, these are 2020 images. I can't tell you exactly what day the image is. We've got 75 rooftops, if you've got 85 lots,
Okay,
to give you a comparison.
okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry for all the extra legwork.
But that's helpful. And then when you say you're waiting, are you waiting on Markley Road traffic?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, quite frequently. We do a lot of work in that area
I think you were talking about Cedar Ridge
where it meets up
was
with
the
Markley.
1,100 vehicle per day, Mr. Stack? Or is that intersection?
Intersection of Cedar Ridge and Markley. That's, it tees right there, basically.
Okay.
That's the,
So-
yeah, that's the stop sign.
So that would
Markley.
take into account.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
We ready for the question?
No.
Do we want to vote?
Well, that's a very good question. Are we comfortable with a motion or a vote at this point?
I think I am.
I think the highlighted Hamlet Meadows helpful.
Okay, well, I'm comfortable with the vote as well.
You want to call?
Assuming a roll call vote?
So understand, call to question, you want to do a roll call? Okay.
That's correct.
All right, Baffa,
No.
Bernhardt,
No,
Good,
Yes,
Linkwitz,
Yes.
Lang,
No.
Olson,
Yes.
Gilmore.
No.
Four, three, no.
4-3, motion fails.
So at this point, thank you. There's no sense in voting on the second portion, or do we need to vote on that as well?
Greg, if you wouldn't mind elaborating, I would very much appreciate it.
The consequence of the denial of the variance does not allow really to go forward on consideration of the merits of the replat, that those have to be approved before the replat could be effectuated. I do think, I realize it's a little awkward in that we had an affirmative motion, understandably, that failed, which generally doesn't allow for providing a specific description of why it was that it failed. Generally ascertainable from the discussion, but I do think it would be helpful for you to actually articulate for the developer the basis of the denial, of the disapproval, if you will, of the variations.
And Greg, just to be clear, the denial or clarification of that, the developer can revise a plat and bring it back forward if they so choose?
That's generally the point of that, is my understanding of the point of that element of the code, is to articulate the basis.
Okay, thank you very much. So who would like to start on the articulation?
I'll go ahead. Commissioner Gilmore here. The basis behind my vote was strictly due to the traffic counts, that I just feel that that many vehicles coming through one point of entry is just, it's too much.
I'm on the same page, just traffic count alone. Being a cul-de-sac of that length, just, yeah, traffic count.
Commissioner Lang. It'd be traffic counts and I think poor planning, as Mr. Blanchard had indicated, on that long of a cul-de-sac, putting the population that far in would be my reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't mean to suggest it required that everyone articulate.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, no, I think that was helpful. I think it was helpful to do exactly what happened.
Okay.
I just meant that I
you-
think as consistent as the indications are,
Okay.
I trust that would provide Mr. Shepherd with an understanding of the basis for the
Okay.
refusal or the denial of the approval of the variations. So that was the point of that exercise.
Okay, well, thank you. I apologize. It's just been an unusual meeting for a lot of reasons, and I took you at, like, literally in that situation.
No, you all did what I think the code intended and
Okay.
With the intent of being helpful for the developer. So thank you.
Thank you. So what is next? Looks like, do we need to bother with a public forum?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we'll open the floor to anybody from the public that would like to make any additional comments.
First off, thanks for everybody's time. I know this is tiring. If this is revised, I ask that future applications be based on current conditions. And just to point out, in the staff report, the Planning Commission has the authority to require a supplemental drainage study to be prepared and submitted by the applicant if it finds it needs to address any drainage concerns, and that would apply to the traffic studies. And can we use current conditions of what would be applied in real life and what is currently available? Thank you.
Thank you.
And I might add, too, this Commissioner Baffa, I'd like to see a new drainage study for the golf course, because we have flooding conditions as is right now, and maybe there could be some modifications done there, and I'm sure it would be an engineering study that the city can't afford, but when there is flooding on the fairways, which there were last year, that doesn't make for good golf.
Don Went, 1401 Bentgrass Drive. I want to thank all of you for all of your hard work. You know, there's been a lot of hard work that's gone into this, but I'd like to make one comment to maybe the commissioners that voted no. I know Hamlet Meadows was used as a reference, but when you look at that, it's a circle. And there is a very short period of where the traffic bottlenecks as compared to this development. So it's not a real good apples to apples, and just take a look at it, just drive through there after this. And I think you'll understand what I'm saying is that, yes, there's that many homes there, but it is a different development, because once you enter in it and you then dissipate right or left as compared to here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Outside, say hi, but I will ask for one thing. Did I understand you that he can come back with some type of a replat, that if there's anything, that the continuation of notification would be awesome with the neighborhood? Is that something standard that can be put out there?
That notification is not standard, and if he did come back with an application, it would be a fresh application. So this application's done.
Okay.
The feedback from the commissioners is there if he so chooses to pursue this action again.
Okay.
And there is notification that initially goes with this, but the notification we continue throughout this process, I'm not being difficult, I'm just saying it's way above and beyond what our standard requirement is. So I guess I'm not comfortable making any type of I guess, setting expectation for that.
But like the sign that you put down at the end of the street, if this comes out, there is some awareness.
Correct,
That
yes.
that would happen again.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. It was a nice meeting you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just think it's very disappointing that you made a decision based on your own feelings and not that of a trained professional engineer. You listen to people who have concerns because this has nothing to do with traffic, doesn't have anything to do with drainage. This has to do with they don't want this in their neighborhood. That's what it comes down to. And this is just excuses to get you guys to rethink your decisions. You're not listening to the engineers, you're not listening to staff, you're not listening to 30 years of engineers doing their work, and we're licensed for a reason because we know what we're doing, and you're not listening to it, and I don't understand it. And I'm just very disappointed, and a lot of you went back on what you've already decided, and I don't understand the reasoning behind it. We have no reason to, our job is to give you the facts. I have no reason to do other than just give you the facts of what engineering principles are and how I feel like, I'm just going to say 600 vehicles a day is nothing. That's nothing. That is not going to cause a problem for traffic jams or anything. And I told you that, and I didn't, obviously it wasn't heard. And you can go grab any traffic engineer you want in the state, and they're going to tell you the same thing. So I think that was a very bad decision to vote that way based on traffic. That was not a sound decision at all, in my opinion. And you didn't take the advice of, I think you should at least maybe get an impartial, if it's because I was hired by the developer, you didn't want to listen to me, or people are against the city, you don't trust the city, maybe they should hire their own engineer. I'd like to see a professional engineer sit up here and tell you that 600 vehicles a day is going to be a problem, because they're not. And if they do, they're not doing it impartially. Sorry.
Thank you.
John Blanchard once again. First of all, I'd like to thank all of you. I know it was a long process. I'd like to thank all of you, and I think all of you mostly had an open mind. Enough about that. I just want to say I graduated from Kansas State with a degree in landscape architecture. I've been practicing land planning for the better part of 30 years. Most of that time was in Park City, Utah, designing ski resorts and golf courses and communities that are associated with those types of products. If you can imagine a place where the median household cost is $985,000, not $119,000 like it is here, your planning commission meetings are extremely contentious. This small group, multiply that times about 40, and it's all of them against you. Okay? This is nothing. I've never seen in my entire 30-year career, and I'll tell you what, we got told no a lot. We got told no for no reasons, for just, we don't want it. It's a thing called the last settler syndrome. We moved to Park City because we love it here. Now we don't want anyone else here. That's what we dealt with. I would have been fired by any client I had if I got up here and told you guys what you just got told. I'd have been fired. You guys did the right thing. It was a 4-3 vote last time. It was a 4-3 vote this time. Nobody read you the Riot Act for voting. None of them did that with you guys for a 4-3 vote. They're tough votes. Whether you voted for it or against it, you did the right thing. You're to be appreciated for serving. It's a hard job. And so I thank all of you. We need to get better staff reports from staff. I think that's one of the things that was shown here. We need better staff reports. But you guys ask questions that I've never seen planning commissions ask before. and I've been to a lot of them. There are a lot of questions asked. All of you were paying attention and asking questions. I appreciate that. They appreciate that. I invite you to look up things on Google, roles of a planning commissioner. There are some good resources out there. And they'll all tell you that there are a lot of projects like the one you just heard. We're lucky we don't get a lot of those here, but a lot of places do. So you can pick up a lot of good information and resources about what's involved with the job. I would also invite you to not only, as I mentioned it before, look at, or I didn't mention it before, I mailed it to you, and that's what I wanted to talk about, was an email I sent to you about American Planning Association and American Institute of Certified Planning. They have a code of ethics. And one section of that deals with decision makers, and that's you. I would ask that you familiarize yourselves with that. And yourselves to going back and refreshing yourselves with the Planning Commission bylaws. And if you haven't had training in the ethics policy, then I ask that as maybe the board chair, you can recommend a schedule for new commissioners to receive that. I know new commissioners come on periodically. But I thank you for your hard work, and it's tough votes, and I appreciate you for making them. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no one else, I'm going to motion for an adjournment.
So moved.
Second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.